Welcome to a webcast from the 43rd Annual Conference of the National Center for the Study of Collective Bargaining in Higher Education and the Professions at Hunter College. The conference took place on April 3rd, 4th, and 5th, 2016 at the CUNY Graduate Center in New York City.
We're going to get started with, the major thing that I want you to know is that David Bergeron, he has 35 years of experience with the Department of Ed before he went to the Center for American Progress. So he's seen it come and go. I'm old enough to remember working for Mr. Simon in early '82 during the new federalism years, and you don't get a chance to be around someone with his perspective and the perspective that our other panelists have. So this should be a real treat. He is Senior Fellow for Post-Secondary Education and American Progress. He worked at the Department of Ed. He was the Chief Advisor on higher education issues and administered more than 60 grants and loan programs to provide nearly $3 billion of money to students and institutions. The institutions and organizations. That includes TRIO. It includes the development programs for minority institutions, FIPSI, the preferred Fulbright Javits and DARE programs, and in turn may qualify institutions to receive federal Pell Grants. He's also been responsible for administrative programs that deal with foreign language instruction, something near and dear to my heart. He served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Planning and Innovation in the Office of Post-Secondary Education. David is now at the Center for American Progress. I would say this, there are very few people in the country that have as much experience with the whole panoply of federal programs dealing with higher education than our first speaker. And so what I'm going to do is, he's now working for Center American Progress. I understand when he came down from Rhode Island, they had some wet snow that was coming, so he may get an extra night here in New York. But we're going to start with David, and then I'll introduce the other two panelists when David completes his presentation. Go ahead, please.
So I'm just going to sit here and people can see me and hear me. Generally, people don't have trouble doing either, right? I look at Martha when I say that because we worked together for a good number of years, it's called 5 or so. What I thought I would do this morning is just to set the stage for the panel, talk about some trends that have been evidenced over the last at least 20 years. I probably would say that those trends began sooner, but our data is not quite as good as you go back in time beyond the mid-90s. One of the trends is that you see community colleges and four-year institutions, for that matter, becoming places where they were disproportionate in terms of enrollment of students. And you saw a drift of more affluent students towards private nonprofits and towards public four-year colleges. And when you think about what's going on in the community colleges, keep that in mind, that there's been this drift towards more affluent students enrolling in other institutions. And that's important because it may explain some other phenomenon, other things that's been going on. The second thing is that we've seen a shift in enrollment of racial and ethnic minority students. Again, more likely to enroll in community colleges and for-profit institutions, and less likely to enroll in four-year publics and nonprofits. Historically, that was certainly not true for African Americans, because African Americans frequently, instead of enrolling in community colleges or for-profit, would enroll in historically black colleges. And so you would see institutions like Jackson State growing, Norfolk State growing, and now you see very much more enrollment in community colleges, sometimes community colleges that are either predominantly black or historically black, or Hispanic survey. So you see a shift in terms of racial and ethnic enrollment, shift in terms of economics. You see a defunding of the public higher education system, and that has disproportionately impacted community colleges. We did a report at the Center for American Progress a couple of years ago where we looked at, we called the Great Recession, Great Retreat. One of the things we looked at when we did that was what was going on in terms of changes, shifts in funding for community colleges. Because we believe, we went into it thinking that the cuts would be disproportionately impacting community colleges. Again, because of the types of students that were being served were not the types of students that where the parents picked from the state legislature. And in point of fact, Virginia, where I lived until 9 months ago, is a great example of this. The University of Virginia saw cuts of about 22% for their for the institutions over a 4-year period. The community colleges in the state of Virginia saw cuts of 35%. So the impacts were disproportionate. And this is part of a broader and more significant trend because on average, community colleges in Virginia spend about $15,000 per year per student that they enroll, post-recession. University of Virginia spends about $85,000 per student there. So, not surprising that you see different outcomes for the University of Virginia and the community colleges in Virginia because they just don't have the same level of resources available to serve the students that are enrolled in those institutions, and those institutions are enrolling students who are worse off economically. They come from underrepresented groups in higher education. So it's a compounding problem in Virginia, and it's not just Virginia. Arizona maybe is even a worse case example because we saw cuts over that 4-year period of about 55% for community colleges last public 4-year, but we've also seen a couple of very significant community college systems in Arizona lose all funding from the state. So one has to question whether they're a community college anymore because they're no longer a public institution. There are other implications there. Another trend that's really important for us to keep in mind is that we saw tremendous growth in college enrollments and reflecting the growth in the number of people graduating from high school until 2009, 2010. 2009, 2010, the number of students graduating from high school peaked at a historic level for the nation. And we will not reach that peak again until 2021, 22. So the enrollment declines that many institutions have seen are going to persist for some significant period of time. Community colleges, by and large, don't close when their enrollments drop, but they do get cut again. And when the enrollments begin to increase again at the 2019, 2020, the line starts to go up again, likely the funding will not come back unless we think very seriously about how we get the public more engaged in funding our higher education system, particularly the institutions serve students that we all care about. Finally, as we all know, remediation is the province of community colleges. About 55% of students enrolled in community colleges have participated in remediation. No other sector comes close. Public 4-year colleges, about 28%. nonprofits that serve kind of a similar kind of student population. Only about 10% of their students are participating in remediation. There's a significant need, significant issue to address about remediation, because remediation is not going to go away. The need for remediation is not going to go away. But we do need to think very seriously and find ways to reinvent the way that we do remediation. So there are two ways that we can respond to these things. We can continue to allow for public disinvestment. We can allow and just observe what's happening in terms of the changes in the economic and racial and ethnic composition of our community colleges, or we can craft some responses. The Obama administration, and I know Mark is going to talk about this in detail, have responded. The Bernie Sanders campaign for president has also responded to these changes. But within academia, we need to be really focused, I think, on two things. One is meeting students where they are, giving them what they need at that time, and that includes reinventing the way that we remediate students who come in to our higher education system with deficits.
Great. Thank you very much. That's a wonderful overview. Martha? Okay, great. Okay, well then, Lynette, it's yours. Lynette is president of the California College Community College Association of California, the community college affiliate of the California Teachers Association and the National Education Association. She has 20 years of experience teaching linguistics, English, and English as a second language at Rio Hondo College in Whittier. And before that, she taught English at California State University in bilingual kindergarten. She earned her PhD in linguistics at the University of California, Los Angeles. And as someone who's set foot on more than 500 community colleges in my lifetime, I've been very impressed with your work in California. And I think you're in for a treat. So with that, please take it away. It's a delight to have you here.
Yes, well, I am from the state of Friedrichs. You just got done listening to a discussion about Friedrichs, and CTA is, of course, the defendant, and it's important to know, just as in general, for all of you to understand that the reason Friedrichs went to the Supreme Court was because they couldn't get at us any other way. The legislature, CTA is powerful in California. The legislature will not pass laws. They couldn't get initiatives passed. So that's why they ended up going to the Supreme Court. And CTA also has defended its pension plan. And as you know, pensions are under attack. Those of you who are in collective bargaining know that you're constantly fighting back against attempts at pension reform, which I would call deform. And the other thing that people find annoying about CTA is that they have successfully fought back all of the state pension initiatives that have come onto the scene. So I'm just curious about you before I start talking. How many of you are the first in your family to go to college? How many of you went to community college? And how many in the room are community college faculty? How many are administrators in a community college? How many are board of trustee members in a community college? The only one. So this is really a community college audience here. I wanted to tell you a little bit about my story to know where I came from. I came from a little different place from some of you. You know, I grew up in San Mateo, California, which at that time was a blue-collar and middle-class community. Now it's the home of Google. So it is no longer blue-collar and middle-class. It is one of the most expensive cities to live in the country. My parents were graduates of UC Berkeley. My father was the first in his family to go to college, and he went to college on the GI Bill. He got a degree in aeronautical engineering, but really didn't like engineering, and ended up as a high school math teacher who also taught literature. And then he taught part-time at community college. And my mother taught language arts in junior high, which now is called middle school. So I kind of had, I had those resources that many of our students do not have, where my parents knew how to negotiate the college experience. When I went to UC Berkeley, because I wanted to, not because my parents pushed me to, but I started out as a Slavic languages major. Then I switched to history. How many historians in the audience? Okay. And then I finally ended up in linguistics because I took a class in linguistics called Linguistics 20 from William S. Wagwam, and it was so interesting to me that that was it. I mean, I was hooked for my life. And I loved all the, funny sounds and things that languages have, like clicks and creaky voice and voiceless vowels and all those fun things that most of us don't get to experience because we only speak English. And so that's what I ended up majoring in, but you can see that it took me a while to decide on what I wanted to do. Then I went to grad school at UCLA, and as our moderator mentioned, I ended up getting my PhD from UCLA, and I wrote in my dissertation on the Bantu hierarchy in Kenyan English. That's probably not one of those general knowledge kind of topics, but it's actually really interesting. And during the process, I taught at Cal State Fullerton, I taught at University of Nairobi, I taught bilingual kindergarten, but then I got a job at Rio Hong Kong. And I was, first of all, surrounded by the very caring and welcoming faculty who became my friends. And this, I think, many of you in community college will have shared that experience. The community of the faculty in the community college is not like the community in other places. And I have to say that one of my original friends and colleagues is sitting in the back of the room, Marianne Pacheco. And I want to acknowledge that her contribution. She was not only my friend and colleague in my department, but she became my mentor in union. And my other two colleagues are also here, Jill Pfeiffer and Sergio Guzman, who are the president and vice president of my union, my local union. And it's because of that, I got involved in not just the teaching, but the union because of the experience that I had working with faculty and also the wonderful students that we have. Because I teach ESL, I have an experience that maybe not all of you had. I was chosen to teach an evening class, and I have to tell you, teaching ESL students in the evening, nothing will build an admiration for students more than that. Because when they wrote their essays about their days, they would get up at 5 in the morning, they would work all day, they would come home, grab something to eat, come to class, and go to class from 7 to 10. And then start all over the next day. I don't know, I always said to myself, I could not have kept up that schedule myself. So this gives me a lot of admiration and a lot of hope for our students. I had a colleague who was a Fulbright exchange scholar, exchange teacher from Norwich, England. His name was Andy Sandlin, and he said, before he left, after the year, he said, the thing that I have found most amazing, that's different from his students in England, is that the students here at Carolina really believe that education is the key to their future. So that is, when we talk about the future of community colleges, the future is with our students and also, for me, with our faculty. And so I would like to talk about some of the things that concern me. And I'd like to start with, a student. You know, a lot of our job is to serve incarcerated students. Well, this is a student who almost became an incarcerated student. And this comes out of Miracosta College, which is in Oceanside, California. There's a faculty member there named Nora Kenny, who is actually doing anthropological field study with her students, having them study their own process as they go through their educational experience. One of her students was actually living in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina, had been in a lot of trouble with the law as a very young man, had been incarcerated, but when Hurricane Katrina came, all the records were destroyed. So he moved to California, got a clean slate, and got into this program. This is a non-credit program at community college. And he went through the non-credit program, went to the credit program, and is now ready to transfer and is applying to UC Berkeley, which is I just seem to be on a UC Berkeley theme here, but his teacher came from UC Berkeley, so he was inspired to apply there. So we have this wonderful system. There are some things looming, some trends looming that may get in the way of success for our students. The first thing that is present, I think, in all of our community colleges is the accountability movement. Yes, and I see some eye rolling. Accountability is fine. You know, I don't have a problem with accountability. As faculty, we're always accountable, right? Those of you who are faculty, we're always accountable. We're accountable to our department, to ourselves, to our institution, to our students. That's not a problem. But in California, we have what is called the Student Success Program. It was passed in a piece of legislation in 2012, and I do have to acknowledge Rich Hansen, who, Rich Hansen is the president of the Community College Independence, and he sat on the Student Success Task Force and successfully prevented us from going a place we didn't want to go, which was performance-based funding. And he and the other faculty members did stop performance-based funding. But many of our states do have performance-based funding. And you know, what's wrong with performance-based funding? You're rewarding people for doing a good job, right? Except that the success of students doesn't just depend on faculty in college. It depends on the students' lives. And if you look at the correlation of socioeconomic status and student success, you will see that the colleges that are least successful by the standards that are set up in these accountability measures have the lowest socioeconomic status in the community, and the ones that are most successful, and I use air quotes here, are the ones in the highest socioeconomic status communities. So what are we actually measuring in the accountability measures? We're measuring poverty. We're measuring middle class, upper middle class. What class are you in? There are some things that help to overcome these barriers, but there certainly is a correlation. And so when we reward colleges that are doing well by giving them more money, and their students are already well equipped to succeed in college, then are we helping? or are we hurting? That's a rhetorical question. The other thing in the accountability system is in California, we require students to fill out, well, we don't require them, but if they don't fill it out, they don't get priority registration, to fill out an educational plan. An educational plan has them at the very first moment they enter college, deciding with a counselor or with a computer what they're going to do in their college career. And, okay, you heard about me, you know, I changed majors twice. How many of you changed majors once? How many twice? How many 3 times? Okay, so a lot of changing majors in the room.
5 times.
5 times, oh, I didn't go as high.
Grad school.
And you had how many?
5.
5 times, there you go. But what's happening with our students, because our community college students are mostly on financial aid, they are getting the message that if they change their major, they are going to lose their financial aid. It may not be true, but if that's what they believe, it's true for them. So that's, besides performance-based funding, the ed plan issues are huge for our students and are a tremendous barrier in actually giving them the college experience that we want them to have, because that's what we have. We want it to be open enough for them and flexible enough that they can change major. So for example, if a person started out, came from a family of philosophers and started out as a philosophy major, and then somehow, you know, got involved took a class in electric car repair. It could happen, okay? It could happen. And found out they loved that. Shouldn't they be able to change to electric car repair? Sure they should. But this program may not, this accountability system may preclude students from doing that. That's not what we want. And conversely, you could have somebody who started out as in a CTE area, like HVAC, and then found out that they loved anthropology because they had to take one of those lower division anthropology courses. They loved anthropology so much, that's what they wanted to major in. We want to make sure that those opportunities are open. And with these accountability systems, that may not be the case, and we don't want to close their doors.
I believe what you're talking about is related to the new federal financial aid guidelines, which limits the amount of times, which limits the extent to which students can transfer courses.
Yes, and there are other things like single course options and, you know, having course IDs. There are lots of other, you know, more complex issues that I don't have time to get into, but yes. But really I'm talking about student perception because, yes, it does have to do with the financial aid guidelines, but what students are understanding is that they can't change majors. That's not true, of course, but that's what they think.
They are limited.
They are limited.
If they're getting federal financial aid.
Right, and that's a problem. We want accountability, but we don't want to limit students and their chance to explore, the same chance to explore that we have as students. So the second issue that I wanted to mention that you are all aware of, but I have to say it, is the reliance on contingent faculty. Okay? And this, I think, comes from a basic misunderstanding by policymakers, and that means legislatures and other people in government, about what teaching is. If you pay somebody for the hours they spend in front of the class, and that's all you pay them for, then you don't understand what teaching is. You know teaching has to be the whole process of preparation, evaluation, professional development, all of that, and contingent faculty in many cases, not every case, but in many cases do not have opportunities to do that. So that's a tremendous barrier, and it has an impact on students because they sometimes don't have office hours. They sometimes don't have any contact besides the class because the faculty member is rushing to another job. And for us in California, we talked about demographics. It has an impact demographically because our students, by and large, tend to be from demographically underrepresented groups. So it affects equity. They do not get the same contact with their faculty as a person might in another setting. So that really matters to us. And the third thing I would like to talk to you about is mission creep and mission loss. Mission creep is the role of the community college originally was to help to walk with those core students from high school or returning students and help them get through, understand the system, and move on to transfer or finish a credential or a certificate or some other qualification. The mission creep that's occurring in California, and I know in other places as well, is we're getting a lot of emphasis on dual enrollment in high school, educating high school students through community college, and a lot of emphasis, a big move on baccalaureate programs, which are brand new in California and only CTE. But there's an anticipation that there's a lot of talk in administration and policy-making bodies that they want to expand the baccalaureate. And so why is this a problem? This is a problem because there's no extra funding for these programs. It would be fine if there were dedicated funding for both of these ends and we still had our funding in place for our core students. But that's not what's happening. And so this is a concern, and this is why I bring it up. But those are areas, and mission loss is, we had in California, one of our goals in the community college system is lifelong learning. We had these programs for people who'd already, people who were coming from the community. Maybe they had degrees, maybe they didn't. And these programs were denigrated by policymakers. They referred to them as things like underwater basket weaving. And they said, well, senior citizens just want to come and use our gym. They should just buy a gym membership. And what is that assumption based on? It's based on the idea that everyone can afford a gym membership. Is that true? Of course not. So these are the issues that we are dealing with in our social justice role in community colleges. But for the future, those are the things I'm concerned about, among others. But I'm also very hopeful because we have a fabulous faculty in community colleges dedicated to teaching, counselors who work with the students and walk with them as they figure out what they want their lives to look like. We have a nurturing environment. My niece, who is now a hospitalist, she's a doctor, did actually attend a number of institutions. Her name is Eva. She went to University of Nairobi, got a degree there, and came to US and went to community college, Cal State Fullerton, UCLA Med School, and she said of all the places she went, the most warm and nurturing environment for her to go to school was at Rio Hondo College. And she was very grateful for that, and she'll say that to anybody. So this is part of our role, and this is what faculty do. They create that nurturing environment for our students. And sometimes our students come back and give us a hard time and say, you didn't prepare me for this, throwing me in the water and see if I sink syndrome that I found when I transferred. But that's okay. We perform that nurturing role and we're fine with it. The other thing that makes me hopeful is that we always have our students. You know, we love our students. They are the most amazing people. Sometimes they're not prepared, but they are the foundation of our democracy. That they will build our nation. And so we always are grateful that we have the opportunity to serve them. So that gives me hope. At Rio Hondo, there was a study many years ago by the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, and they looked at why students dropped out. And I know other places have done studies like this and confirmed these same results. They did not drop out because they were unhappy with the classes, the college, or anything like that. They dropped out because their boyfriend didn't drive them to school anymore, because their mother got sick, and because their job hours changed. So it's life that gets in their way sometimes, but they are still our hope. And I also am very hopeful about some of the initiatives in CTE. How many of you in your states are having new initiatives in career tech education in workforce? Yeah, this is a trend and a good trend. So I'm very hopeful about this. We need to make sure that the money goes to the programs and the students and not to consultants and additional levels of administration. But as long as that happens, even with dual enrollment and with baccalaureate programs, as long as that happens, we're fine. And then finally, community colleges in California, and I believe in most states it's the same, are local institutions. Funded locally, governed locally, local boards of trustees. This is part of the American system. This is, for our nation, a really important institution. So that makes me hopeful as well. And before I close, I just want to tell you that my community is here. I want to acknowledge my community, Rich, and my people from Rio Hondo College, because that's what we're all about. Together, students, faculty.
Education and senior fellow at New York University. Her academic interests include the confluence of access, equity, and excellence, the intersection of politics and policy in American higher education, and the contribution of America's community colleges to our nation's social and civic future, fabric, and economy. In 2009, President Obama nominated Martha to serve as the U.S. Undersecretary of Education, with oversight responsibility for all federal post-secondary, statutory, regulatory, and administrative policies and programs for the U.S. Department of Education. And that includes the $175 billion annual federal student aid Title IV programs, higher education, adult education, career technical education, international education, and 6 White House initiatives. And when it comes to funding higher education, the first term of the Obama administration is the best we've had. If we had Mount Rushmore, it's the best since Lyndon Johnson, is kind of my take on the thing.
He can take the credit.
He can take credit too. It's a good thing to take credit for. Because we went from 6 to 9 million Pell recipients in the country at the precise time the states were cutting aid. In my state, we lost 36%. And we made a heck of a lot of progress, and we prevented a lot of bad things from getting much worse. So she worked closely with President Obama's goal to have the best educated, most competitive workforce in the world by 2020, and oversaw the successful implementation of direct student loans that resulted in a 50% increase in college enrollment. That was a great. That's right, and that was something that my mentor, Paul Simon, was pushing for many, many years ago before that. Previously, Martha served as president of De Anza College and then chancellor of the Foothill De Anza Community College District for 16 years, so she's grounded in the field. She began her career as an alternative high school teacher, holds a BA in sociology from Brandeis, a master's of education from Harvard, and her doctorate in education from the University of San Francisco. Delighted to have you.
Well, thank you, Steve. Well, I'm really happy to be here. I do have a PowerPoint with some slides. I'm not sure if we want to pull it up. Do you know how to do that?
Which one?
Well, I don't even know. It's called the Promise Campaign, I think.
That's last.
The last one.
I can't
And-
this time on this.
but I don't know if there's a click or anything else. But let me tell you, when I think about the future of community colleges and the trends and the pressures that, every institution and especially the students and faculty are facing, I too am hopeful because we haven't had the kinds of conversations that we need to be having around mission and values that I've seen in the last decade. It's been mostly about the economy, academic capitalism, every which way of performance funding, and one of the things that we really wanted to do leaving the administration was try to think about how do we bring a conversation back to the fundamental values that this country was built on? Are we going to leave half to 2/3 of the people behind? Are we going to, are we not going to have a middle class anymore in this country? Is the economic and social divide in this country getting to be steeper and steeper every year, which it has, which David, talked about? And where is the tipping point? So, when we think about things we can do, and if you've come away from this session with anything, we'd like you to be part of a new movement. And we need AFT, we need CTA, we need the independents, we need every voice of students and faculty in this country to say, basically, enough is enough. And we need to really, really get back to what we believe in and what we value. And that might sound like pie in the sky, and it may sound too idealistic to all of you. So one of the things, there were a couple of things, when David and I are in the administration, and he certainly spent, many decades there. I was fortunate to be on campuses and, with students during that time. But in thinking about, how do you transition from an environment that we're all experiencing, we're all doing 2 and 3 jobs. I don't think I meet anybody now, if you're teaching in a classroom today with technology and everything else, which as I am right now, we're all doing 2 or 3 jobs. And we all are thinking, how are we going to get this next generation highly educated to be able to understand all of the changes that are taking place so quickly? And if I see more students walking down the street with hunched over, not like standing up straight. People don't stand up straight anymore. They just walk with their technology in front of them and bump into people, especially in New York. And so, what you do, whether you're a trustee or faculty member, is so critically important to educate the future of the middle class in this country that I think we need to, as you said, really lock arms and have a collective voice. I was going to ask you about that voice that you studied that you didn't have a voice. Because our students, just the vowels, our students have so many pressures on them, and increasingly because of stratification, because of poverty, because of all the things that David and Lynette have talked about, it's so much, the stakes are so high that I think to myself, how are we going to really have everyone walk away from every speech that all of us are in and all of us listen to and all of us go back with these materials and say, we're going to be part of talking about a new movement in education and get the conversation actually in many ways back to, where the Constitution was founded. It really, when you think about the Moral Act, and also, so David knows this, around 2010-11, we were writing things about, how do you create a Moral Act for the 21st century? And how do you say to people that want to privatize everything, including, community colleges, including sort of getting rid of what we have done historically with education, how do you push back to that? And create this kind of a movement where we just start talking about what we ought to be and where we need to go. So I want to talk, and what I've been doing now after thinking about, how do you create momentum for broken promises historically? And I sort of go back in my own life, used a couple of personal things. I go back to 1983. And I don't know if Rich Hansen will remember this, David certainly doesn't, but in California, there was a report written called Promises to Keep. You remember, yes? Okay, and I carry that around. Because there's one phrase in that from a Hispanic young girl who said, the reason I made this transition and the reason for my success is because someone believed in me. And I found a faculty member, I found a class, I found a passion for learning and a major, and I went through and I did this. At a time when in California, everything was moving in the other direction. Everything was saying, you know, get rid of remediation in community colleges. Well, where's remediation gonna go then? We're gonna put everybody then now in other systems that are gonna cost more. And I don't think we've made a case as a large community. And I'm gonna put this into the PowerPoint eventually. I wanna show what we did, you know, have done in many states, which was to build prisons over the last 30 to 50 years and not really build capacity in community colleges and universities. And if we had thought about it differently and had focused on prevention and education, we would not have these enormous prison systems. I say, I would like the salaries of prison guards to be the salaries of our faculty, especially our part-time faculty. We've just mismatched our entire psychology as a country. And so it's very, very important to me that all of us kind of go back to explaining and articulating what this value proposition is and why. So what we've done is we've launched a College Promise campaign. At the time I started looking at this, I started looking around the country. There were about 50 programs, the earliest of which was Kalamazoo. And Kalamazoo was fortunate to have a philanthropist that didn't want to be known, so the person is still anonymous. And he took the major part of his wealth and put it in an irrevocable trust. It's a very important word, irrevocable trust, to fund any graduate of a Kalamazoo high school in perpetuity to go to any 2 or 4 year college in Michigan, and an approved list, you'll appreciate this, of private institutions, AKA not bad performing for private institutions. So that is a protected, it's one of, at that time, 50 models. There are now 125 models. So what we're doing in the Promise campaign is we've put together a database of all of these programs to show, in California, for example, there are 10 now. And there were just 2 or 3, well, the first one was the Long Beach Promise back in 8 years ago. And so communities, the thing that makes me excited is that communities are starting to say, we have got to do more for students and people who live in our communities. Some of the Promise programs are much more inclusive. They allow any student, in addition to, you know, high school graduates, any students that are 18 years or older, much like the Pell Grant, to be able to take advantage of the Promise programs. Others, as you might imagine, in other states are more restrictive. Some are, and you'll hear this word quite a bit in College Promise lingo, first dollar or last dollar. So some of the programs, like in Tennessee, will fill for every Tennessee resident the difference between a Pell Grant and state aid to fix that amount in, you know, for students. Whereas others, like Kalamazoo and Long Beach and others, and now San Diego even, are adding dollars. And even in the state of Oregon, some are thinking about Promise programs where they're building capacity and giving back the money that was taken out in the recession, which is so important for stabilizing and building capacities on campus to do the kinds of things we talked about, in addition to giving students a promise that they will not have to pay tuition or fees going forward. The promise is starting with community colleges, but not limited to. So what we want is student choice. What we want is widespread understanding that high school is not enough. So if you come away from this, you know, with 3 or 4 talking points, it's, you know, we gave the College Promise after the GI Bill, you know, through the GI Bill after World War II. We gave the College Promise to, I don't know how many of you took advantage of the National Defense Student Loan Program in the 50s. Yeah. And people virtually went for free. I remember in California it was free. And people talk about skin in the game, and that drives me crazy. You're going to hear that language a lot. We can't do any program unless you know, our students and our people have skin in the game. Well, you know, I think it's so important to talk about the skin in the game for students that are also working in community colleges, because they're also paying taxes, putting those hours in. I'm reading tomorrow, there's a dissertation defense at the University of Pennsylvania. This woman, Nyaggah, she'll be called not Dr. Nyaggah pretty day after tomorrow, I guess, most likely. But her dissertation is about work and education in community colleges. And she did case studies of 56 students, they're predominantly Latino and African American, Latino. And the stories of these students in terms of being responsible students and having the kinds of skin in the game to get an education, this is what we have to start articulating back in the public sphere. I think we've been far too quiet. And so, you know, we built this campaign to say, we've got to do more. We're calling it Heads Up America. We have a board of all kinds of people. We've got Phi Theta Kappa they're going to be talking about College Promise. These are all good students, great students. They want to organize themselves. We've got student governments around the country participating, the community college student groups, the rural groups, the trustees, of course, and the presidents. And we need faculty support. We need the leadership of faculty to explain the concepts of why are we doing this? Why do we want a free education? What is its purpose? Why did we have it and then disappeared? How can we get it back? And what is it going to mean? The devil's in the details, you all know. You know, the devil's in how do we finance this going forward in a sustainable way. So we are going to do a big conference this summer in June on financial sustainability of College Promise programs and how can we use government money and private money to create these irrevocable trusts or create promises that are really going to be delivered over time, not go into the recession and have to cut, you know, and slash and burn community college budgets and university budgets, but to have some sort of, don't you think we could really think through some sort of stability funding, you know, for this next century? So I don't know if we want to, I don't even know how to do, is there a clicker here?
Yeah.
Oh, you can. I can just go through some of these slides really quickly. So I've talked a lot about the campaign, building widespread support. You can just keep going. We've got a big organizing and awareness effort across the country. It's Heads Up America. It's bipartisan. So Governor Geringer put an irrevocable trust in place in Wyoming. It's called the Hathaway Scholars Program. He's very passionate about ways to think about this. I can tell you as a Republican governor who does not like the word free, but he does like the word responsible students. And so we've been having pretty good dialogue about, you know, should students graduate with manageable debt? And of course, I say we want students to graduate without debt so that they can use that you know, financial capital that they've been able to garner to get a car and a house, or even, you know, pay for an apartment so that they can move on with the rest of their life. So that's a dialogue that is going to be pretty prevalent. I've got a whole list of criticisms that you'll see in this PowerPoint. We launched Heads Up America, so Dr. Biden is the other half of the chairpersonship, and the two of them together are working together. We have a board meeting in New York in a couple of weeks. And they want to have a voice that we need to do a lot more, and we haven't really thought this through. We've got different committees. We've got a National Education Committee, a group of business leaders. We've got foundations involved. And we really want to see in each state a group of leaders that include faculty and students and policymakers and government people working together. So I can use the example of the Richmond Promise or the Oakland Promise. There's a promise program that crops up every week now, and they're all different. So there's not one great model. But Richmond, they wanted to do $1 billion refinery modernization. Chevron wanted to do this in the community. They could not get permission, so they had to negotiate a program with the K-12 schools, Contra Costa Community College District, the mayor's office, and the public policy government leaders in that region. They put in place a couple of weeks ago the Richmond Promise. They had been working on it for a whole year. They're going to give this opportunity to any student that graduates from a Richmond school to any 2 or 4 year public in California. So things like that, just communities are starting to think this through. And we're not going to propose a perfect model, but we are going to try to optimize choices for public policy people to look at as they then think about their own communities and what more could they do. So I know in California, Santa Barbara's going to launch, Los Angeles is talking about it, and we need your voice to help us articulate the first dollar opportunity. The fact that you need to build capacity in these institutions because they have lost so much in the recession. There needs to be a sustainable component, and in my view, it needs to be inclusive. It should not just be, if you just look at the high school trajectory, only a third of our college-educated folks are going to come from high schools in the next 10 to 20 to 30 years, even with the growth that David talked about. 2/3 are going to come from the 18 to 30-year-olds that didn't go forward in education. So we have a huge number of people to serve, much less the working students that are even older than 30. So when you think about the trajectory of people, I kind of think about, 18 to 40 to 50, not to say that, older adults like me shouldn't go back and maybe get a second chance to do something different, because I think I think we should be putting in a WPA, frankly, that's sort of where I am. But I think there's just a lot of opportunity to educate, not just early young high school graduates. We have to educate the immigrant population. We've got refugees coming in. We just have all manner of people. So in terms of enrollment growth, while it's softening as recessions, subside and we have a little more economic growth, that happens in community colleges. That's happened in every decade in my, more than 40 years in higher education. We've got a big research and policy effort. We'll have a baseline report on college promise programs from the University of Pennsylvania this summer. They're actually studying each of these 125. They're grouping them into eligibility criteria, financial sustainability models, and outcomes. And some of the early outcomes, we don't have a lot of outcomes because the programs are young. But if you look at Kalamazoo or you look at Long Beach, there is a wealth of people, not only on the access side coming in, but going through to say, yes, this is helping me not drop out, as you said, for financial reasons, which is one of the reasons that students drop out. Just keep going, yes. These are already talked about, the different kinds of databases. These are all the reasons about why it matters. And I think, in terms of trends, you can kind of look at this list of trends and think about the fact that, without a change in how we think about educational opportunity, we are not going to have a society anymore. Our democracy is at risk. So I think if you can talk about high school is not enough, will we have a middle class? And what are the fundamental tenets of the democracy that we so desperately need, that we're seeing in the presidential campaign as an example, out the door. I mean, anything's okay, right? Racism is just fine and walls are just fine. We have got to get back to some basic values. As David said, we've got a huge gap in low-income students, poverty, lagging behind, and we need to really work on that in community colleges. And then if you're talking to people, about American competitiveness, which seems to be a public sphere conversation quite often, you can say, well, we're 12th in the world. We used to be first right after World War II. And we need to get this society educated in far better ways. So, community colleges have almost half of the undergraduates in the country. You may not know that. And we are going to need more and more students. I look at the $2 trillion that is sitting in offshore banks, and I think to myself, if we had a progressive Congress, we could say that a portion of those dollars could be tax credits for industry and could fund the whole thing. It could fund, what we did for veterans through the GI Bill. So do we have the funding? It's not in the bank. We pay for what we value. You could do it with a small amount coming over from a variety of other ways that Congress has, paid for its expenses. So it's a real concern. And, who would benefit? All the students that we talk about, you can just keep going there. These are just statistics. I can send you this PowerPoint. This slide, I was actually chastised the other day. I was at an AFT meeting on Saturday in Las Vegas, of all places. They had their annual conference, and we're talking about this. And, I said, well, when you have to talk to, the business community, talk about how much education helps students put money in the coffers from their taxes. And you could add on to that, with more than 2/3 of community college students working anyway, the tax base is strengthened the more education you get. And they said, well, just put another one in and talk about prisons and healthcare, and the fact that if you're not educated, we're going to be spending more on healthcare and more on prisons. And so I am going to put those slides in to sort of be more of a balance to this one. Yeah.
The benefit cost analysis of CUNY's ASAP program does have some of those things. It includes better health outcomes and such things, so
Right.
reduced costs.
Right. And, CUNY, I should say that the ASAP program, you've doubled the completion outcomes. So, with an investment up front, they doubled the money going into the CUNY programs. In the pilot test, they had a randomized controlled trial study. We're all happy, we have good research, and we have the proper investment. And now they're trying to scale that to other CUNY campuses to say, what can we learn, knowing that every campus is going to do it differently.
This is the thing to realize, though, is that even with the scaled up version, which is getting some efficiencies of things, it's a 30% increase in investment.
Right, exactly. So I think these are the points that we need to make, in every state, in these communities, that if you invest wisely with all that we've learned about the ways that we need to incentivize student success, we can have the completion numbers to go along with the access increases.
I have a question, and everything you've said reinforces the question. Why is the College Promise program limited to college level courses? And why does it not seem to include the wonderful occupational non-credit courses that so many certificate programs and such help so many community colleges offer?
They do include CTE, and they do include transfer general education courses. Why not the remedial courses? I don't have a good answer.
These are not remedial.
Well, non-credit?
Right.
Yeah,
The occupational.
I don't know that they don't. I don't think I've really looked through to see if any of those programs are funded, but I don't think so. I think communities have said we have adult education, we have other ways to do this.
With the
And so
emphasis now on stackable credentials.
Yeah.
Right, that students can come in, many, not all, but many students, especially in our classes, can come in and get non-credit credentials that will stack and articulated to credit-bearing programs.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think I would have to look into it and see, are there any Promise programs that are allowing that door in and funding for it? I know at CUNY, what they did was they set a bar, an entry level, and said remediation needs to take place between, K-12 and higher ed. I think you have actually in the CUNY, you send students to an intensive remediation in the ASAP.
There are, students are required to begin to address needs the summer before enrollment, but they can continue working on them while they're enrolled in credit-bearing courses. It's the students who have a lot of deficiencies in all the three areas that CUNY tests, they're not admitted into ASAP. They are required to do the alternate remediation, immersion kind of program before enrollment.
Let me just go just a couple of slides forward toward the end so we can have the rest of the time for a discussion. There's just a list of common criticisms that I want to go into. Tennessee and Oregon and Minnesota are states that already have Promise programs. There's another 10 states that are introducing legislation So I think with the issues that we're talking about, the eligibility criteria, who gets to participate, is there capacity building that's coupled with that? Is it first dollar or last dollar? Those are the kinds of questions. But these are the criticisms. So when we talk about trends going forward, these are the things I worry about. People saying college is not for everyone. I say to them, we have to understand college is a broad term. College means high school is not enough. College means that we want people to become the lifelong learners that you talked about. The low graduation rates is a big problem. I can point to CUNY, I can point to any number of California colleges where we're having a lot of success with that because the faculty are doing things differently. And that's another thing that we can do is asking faculty, how are you thinking about completion and what are we doing differently? Certainly all the work in remediation and development, I don't even call it remediation, I just call it developmental education, has been phenomenal. And that's been led by faculty and the work in mathematics with these math labs and so forth. I think those are success stories that we need to scale. And you can't scale it without funding. You can't scale what works without funding. So I think that's another point that could be made, that the research is there, the money is not. You cannot take 20, 30, 50% in 90% in Arizona and not scale these kinds of things that do work with the faculty have worked so hard. There is pushback from the universities, why spend it in this sector? Why focus on community colleges? I say, well, that's where half the undergraduates are, and don't you want a more educated middle class? And it's not exclusive, so if we had more funding to fund the full 4 years, and David wrote a great paper through CAP about this, about public education, and this is really Bernie Sanders' agenda. He really picked that up, which is really great. So I think I'm going to stop there in terms of trends going forward and just ask everyone and open this up and turn it back to Steve to sort of spend the last part answering questions that David and Lynette and I can be helpful with. But we do want you to know about this. We want you to go to headsup.america.us. We want you to help in your states and in your community saying, high school is not enough and we need to do a lot more. And we can't do it without not only helping students, but building back the capacity that we're going to need for student success.
If when you ask your questions, if you could identify your name and where you're from, that'd be great. Go ahead, please.
My name is Bob Zazali. I handed it over earlier because I work at a 4-year public institution, not a community college. I want to present something. It's not a proposal, it's just a presentation of something we're doing. Rowan University is one of the public universities in New Jersey, increasingly designated as a research classified university. Well, we've always had a strong partnership with community colleges. We have a lot of reciprocal agreements. Many of our students are community college students and they want to graduate. The issues you talked about with concerns over graduation rates of community colleges, enrollments, etc., found them to reach out to us, and we, I think, come up with a very interesting partnership. We've always had a partnership, but they wanted a stronger partnership. When I say they, this is Gloucester County College and Burlington County College. So we've developed affiliation agreements with them, where Gloucester County is now Rowan College at Gloucester County, and Burlington is Rowan College at Burlington County. Any student that's admitted that goes to those county colleges is automatically a student at Rowan University. If they want to go on, if they're successful and get their AA degree, or before, and they want to enroll and then finish at Rowan University, they can. If they don't, they can't. They don't have to. They can go someplace else, so they can get their AA in some specialized area and get a job, whatever the case may be. Also, we're working with them on having actually programs that they can do 2 years of community college and finish those 2 years at that community college as well, get a 4-year degree on certain programs. The win ain't a win-win thing, but it is. For us, it solidifies our enrollment source, which we've had anyway, but it solidifies that, strengthens that. Also, our students, our president is very concerned about debt. Our students graduate with debt, and we're a public university that's not that expensive. This enables, and he wants as many students as possible for community college. This enables them to spend a much lower rate for those 2 years, and then really flip it to 2 other years, even at a reduced rate, because we have other programs where they can get scholarships, etc. So you can almost get a 4-year degree for about $20,000, when you add in all these other incentives we have. I think it's been a great program. We've only done with 2 schools, and it's infancy stages. So far, it's been very, very beneficial to them because they believe the brand has helped them, and the enrollment is strong. We'll see how it goes, but it's a model that has worked for us, and in New Jersey, it may not be a model that's applicable elsewhere, but I think it deals with issues of cost, accessibility, quality. Their faculty are excited about it, our faculty are excited. We're AFT, we're strong unionized faculty. So I think there's a lot of benefits for something like this, where both for students in particular and for the universities.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Steve mentioned, I moved to Rhode Island after a few years in the DC area. And in Rhode Island, if you're admitted to the community college of Rhode Island, you are also admitted to the University of Rhode Island and Rhode Island College. So that basically has built a similar structure. I think that in my critique, my experience observing it from my limited time in Rhode Island is that it sounds nice. It's how the devil's in the details. How do you actually make it work effectively? And common course numbering is part of it clearly, but building faculty across institutions so that there really is, as you said, the ownership of your faculty, of the students while they're at the community college. That still hasn't really taken hold. And so it's more of a work in progress, but it really, I think you're right, it's a direction we should be thinking about. There are lots of places where the system is unnecessarily complex, and if we can figure out ways to simplify it for students so that they move more seamlessly through it, I think we'd all be much better off.
Yeah, I should emphasize that. That's also a benefit of this. Previously, while they would get admitted from the university, they had to go through a whole entire application process, yada, yada, yada. How many students just bail out of that? This is a seamless, they're already in it.
Yeah.
It's a matter of what they do, with their career to make it work.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that that's what University of Rhode Island is studying, Community College of Rhode Island and Rhode Island College. So they built that infrastructure there. The question is faculty ownership. Right. Do the faculty own those students before they arrive at there?
And advisement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask the crowd, how many of you have accessed the Heads Up website before this presentation? Okay. How many of you, Mark, how many of you have heard of college promise type programs though? Quite a number of them. Okay. And how many of you, after hearing what you've heard, are more enthused about the idea? Raise your hand. Okay, that's a good sign too. Sir, you had your hand up. You were, or ma'am, go ahead, please.
I have 2 things, so please bear with me. First one is, in 1983, I had the position at Lynette now has. I was president of the Community College Association. We had a very robust discussion about whether or not community colleges should be free. Initially, under the master plan in California, all of higher education was free. University of California, State University. Community colleges were the last ones. I had a great speech, which I won't give to you. It was called a plot. Because the demographics that the first speaker spoke about were already known in 1980. It was already known that California would become a majority-minority state. And it was also very clearly known that community colleges were where those students were. Interestingly enough, CPAC issued a study for the legislature that said that the average community college student was a board housewife in Marin County. Well, Marin County, for those of you who are not from California, is exceedingly wealthy. That was not true. Those of us who argued against tuition, which is still the lowest in the nation, said, no, you're going to have a disproportionate impact on Oakland, on Los Angeles, the large urban areas, and guess what? California, believe it or not, is primarily rural. You can have a huge impact on places like Fresno and Visalia. And that was exactly what happened. So I think one of the issues that is not discussed is not just look at the demographics, but look at how the policymakers have responded. Because if I wanted to have a plot, and I wanted to make sure that the new majority was not successful in accumulating power and influence, what I would have done in California was limit access to the California community college. So I don't think that that was an accident. And I haven't heard enough research. And I'm now a trustee. I was a community college instructor for 37 years, so I didn't do research, but I have all kinds of great ideas for other people. And I would be very interested in someone really doing the research into how that projected change in the demographics, not just in California, but nationwide, impacted the actual policy of how community college in particular were going to be funded and how they were going to be structured. And my second point, which is even briefer than my previous one, which, as my colleagues in Rio Hondo, was really brief. The second one is we have a promise program in our district through El Monte. And in response to your question, El Monte is Hispanic immigrant poverty level. Okay, the rest of our district has some areas that are wealthy, but this is abject poverty. People living without running water. They don't want access to lower level because they have been told all their lives that's the only access they can have. So the El Monte promise does two things. Not only does it guarantee admissions to Rio Hondo College and to our neighboring UC and CSU campuses, it teaches them about banking. And it teaches them the investment of a family in education. They have an agreement with the bank out of West Virginia, God bless them. For every dollar, literally every dollar that those families put into the bank up until the child is out of middle school, that bank matches. And after that, they match a percentage of it. That is going to make a difference. They don't want to save money to go to adult ed. And I love adult ed. I taught it for a while. They want money to be able to see themselves at UC Berkeley, going through Rio Hondo, going to UC Irvine, going to Cal State Fullerton. That's what that community wants. Because for so many of them, it's been the limited horizon. It's been to just do this. Not that the bar is too high, it's that your dreams aren't high enough. And I suspect that for many of the other promise areas, and certainly Martha could talk about that, that's the underlying idea. These are not communities where people need to learn how to work at McDonald's. They don't need to learn enough English to be able to take your order. They need to learn enough English to be able to someday, like one of my students, who was a gangbanger, has now been accepted to the Harvard Graduate School of Business. That's what that community wants. And so I think that that's part of the response to you, why they're not available. I think you were the one who raised the issue.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear that I was not talking about adult ed. I was not talking about low-level, non-credit programs. I'm talking about sophisticated non-credit certificate programs, like in project management, those kinds of things. At least at my institution on the non-credit side.
Now, I think there might be, go ahead.
I think in most of our institutions, those are not on the non-credit side of the house. Those are on the credit side of the house. Because those are sophisticated programs, and we don't put those in non-credit.
I was just at a part of the panel, and the non-credit stuff is all over the place across state lines. And so one of the issues is how do you just simply get your hands around it? And it's not tracked well across state lines either. And I think this has opened up the community colleges to criticisms to say we pull out students because when we do non-credit welfare to work and job training, we're not able to say what percentage of students land in the regular curriculum. Just like we can't say, Mr. Congressman, tuition's unfortunately generating 40% of our income, and Pell Grants are producing X percent of that tuition dollar when you show up on campus. We're not saying that either, and I think we need to. Sir?
Yeah, I'm a second generation. My name is Matt Dunkel. I'm from Elpina Community College. I'm a second generation community college instructor. And so I've seen changes since the 1960s. My experience as a small boy going to last winter. And the number of positions faculty has increased measurably. It's increased a lot. And the money seems to be continually flowing into building buildings on campus. And there's this sense that education is a product. It's defined by a structure. And somehow we're missing the key element here, which is that it's flesh and blood. And it's all the things he's talking about, the way we connect with students. That doesn't happen because you have an edifice with an administrator's name on it. So how are we going to get the dollars to flow into what I would say is the right channel in order to come up with educated people who are going to define the future?
I mean, I think this policy focus on building capacity in the institutions by adding funding for faculty to accommodate the new students that we're going to be teaching, and at the same time giving students the, telling students and families that they don't have to go to debt to be able to have. I just think the policy conversation has to be just that sort of twin, and then you show the chart of the prisons and you show the chart of the de-investment over the last 15 years, and you say, this is a country where we're going to have middle class and scare people with disparate impact and other things.
Well, I was just going to say, the reason we invest in buildings and not people is because we bond finance.
We what?
We can bond finance.
We can bond finance, yeah.
Right, so we
Yeah.
can shove the costs into the future of the buildings,
Yes.
but we can't of the people.
Yeah, and funding formulas often include square footage, right?
Right.
Mark. I'm Mark Smith from the NEA, and Martha Nelson as well, but both the NEA president and the AFT president are on the College Promise National Board, and we're talking about labor costs that we've asked us to do. One of the things NEA has mentioned at every board meeting is, we're strong supporters, partially because this program recognizes the need for funding. The funding is for more faculty and staff, faculty to teach, staff, including counselors and librarians, to help students better navigate their way through. So they get it. People are really the connection. I understand you can bond buildings, but still, you need people to fill them and people to connect with the students who, after all, are people and don't connect with buildings as well.
We'll go here to Kevin and then in the back.
Just kind of the other side of it, people versus faculty versus infrastructure. When you have buildings that are riddled with asbestos and PCBs, which I do, and faculty say, I don't want to work in that building, and students who, if they find out what that building is like, don't want to go in the building, you kind of got to fix them up. Now, not every campus is in that boat. When we were on campus built in the 1950s, when everything was riddled with asbestos and PCBs, and we have an individual window air conditioner hanging out of 50 windows. The building pays for itself, and you can get rid of those and have no HVAC. So that's part of the issue. We're struggling with the contingent faculty issue now versus full-time faculty, because we have one of the highest rates of full-time faculty in community college. But my faculty want a higher raise. They want more of a raise than we can afford. For every 3 full-time faculty that I hire, I can give my faculty 1 point across the board. So, and we hired 7 faculty, 7 new full-time faculty. Because the department chairs, who are union members, come to me all the time saying, we need more full-time faculty. So occasionally we give them to them. Then there's not as much money to go around, so that will collective bargaining agreement in a fashion that full-time faculty would like. So we balance these things all the time. We're making this.
My point is just that there's been a cultural shift, and the way full-time faculty bond with one another, the way they create a kind of culture that creates buy-in by students, can't be replicated by people who are paid very low wages and who have to travel between campuses. You're not going to have an educational experience.
And that's right, we favor full-time faculty.
Yeah.
But then the money isn't there for the next collective bargaining contract. Right?
Sure.
Just really quick with non-credit, I think someone mentioned that in the nation it's difficult to get your hands on what's what's right or what's wrong, or which classes are or not. In California, we have that, but also there's a move in California to make certain levels of remedial English and math move those to non-credit. That brings us back to bargaining, because that's going to be really important. Non-credit instructors in California get paid way less, and they're not part of our collective bargaining agreement or our faculty. So now they're trying to move certain classes to that. That's going to have an impact on how we bargain, because it's going to drive our unit to begin to look at how faculty and non-credit are higher, and they get paid the same amount of money that they will get paid for regular faculty in the community college. So that's going to have an impact on how we do things, especially now that we're in a bargaining conference. But that's important. People are not talking about that a lot. As far as the other stuff, I think investment in faculty, either part-time, and a lot of times there's a lack of investment from the institutions into part-time faculty, or even with full-time faculty. We have politicians, and I'm speaking to California, I don't know politicians outside California, politicians make decisions about what needs to happen in the community college system or the university, but they're really not educators. They don't have that hat. I believe that anyone that works in a community college system or university by themselves, even if you're an administrator, if you're a board member, you have that hat of an educator. You need to begin to utilize that hat as an educator. Politics are not ever going to do that, so it has to be us to work in the community college, us to work at the university, that begin to make changes that are they create an environment for everyone that works there, a favorable environment to begin to, like, students are going to get attached not necessarily to the college, but to people. If people are invested into the college because they see the college is invested in them, then it's going to become easier for them to invest themselves into with the student. And I don't think people see that. Like I see it all the time. People get attached to people, not necessarily buildings, not necessarily colleges, but people. So when you make that connection with somebody, there's more likely than not you're going to stay there. So we need to begin to embrace that as a college, as a system, and not politicians, because politicians don't understand that.
We're at the close of our time. I want to make this last comment. In my native, do we have any Illinoisans in the room? If you go back outside, be sure to listen to them, because they've had some core discussions over their mission. And I was just meeting with the community college president from Illinois, who they decided, his executive team, they haven't been paid since July 1st. So they've gone gone from public good to private good to no good. that what do we preserve? What's our core? And they decided they were going to protect the adult basic ed and GED functions, because that was the open door for them. And I urge us to pay attention to our friends from Illinois. That's a state that had 7,500 incarcerated in 1970, 49,500 in 2010, 1 million on Medicaid, and 83 million now. So those are those historic trends that our audience is talking about. Let's give them
This ends the webcast from the 43rd Annual Conference of the National Center for the Study of Collective Bargaining in Higher Education and the Professions at Hunter College in New York City.